Good morning, everyone. My name is Olivia Dwyer. I work with the Adirondack North Country Association, and we are very excited to have you this morning for our Grant Writing 101 webinar. We have a great turnout, and we're very excited to have you here and share the knowledge experience that we can offer to you. And without further ado, we'll get started. Quick overview of our agenda. I'm going to give you just the 2-minute introduction to ANCA in case this is your first time meeting all of us. Jen Perry, my colleague, will give her Grant Writing 101 presentation. This is general information about how to find grant funding resources, identify the ones that are the best fit for you, and prepare and submit applications, and then manage those grants if and when you are awarded them. That presentation will be about 45 minutes. And then at the end, we'll come back together for a quick Q&A and to share all of our contact information. So who is ANCA and where do we work? We serve New York's 14 northernmost counties. It's kind of easiest to get a grasp of that by looking at the map. So there we are. And so what do we do? Our vision is a new economy that works for everyone. We'd like to build prosperity across northern New York and create and sustain wealth and value in our local communities. And this is a quick summary of the milestones we've marked in the past 5 years as we've engaged in that work. And as you can see there, we've had an impact. This is from our 2020 to 2025 strategic plan, which was published now about 18 months ago. So the exciting news is we've added to these numbers since then. And now I will introduce you to my colleague, Jen Perry. She's going to be leading the presentation today. She has 28 years of grant writing experience and project management. $8 million that she's sourced for various organizations and projects over those 28 years and funded different programs that have served the North Country. And you'll see a quick summary of those here. She's worked in our ANCA Clean Energy program. Her newer project is Compost for Good, which you'll learn more about in local food systems and in Jen's general info room if you're interested in conversation about that. And then you'll see she has experience in smoking cessation projects. She ran her own small business, which is great knowledge to have in-house for our small business program. And she's worked with schools and municipalities as well. And there you go, Jen.
Thank you again. I don't know where we're at for numbers. I know a lot of folks reached out to us and said that they were unable to come for work reasons, but they were interested in the recording. And I think we had heard from, I'm going to guess it's probably over 225 at this point. So the vast amount of interest in this topic, and I've already done another presentation for just compost businesses that were 50 attendees. So clearly this has hit a nerve, and why not? It's free money. So we're really excited to engage with you. Grant writing is such a fun topic because it really is the process by which a lot of people with passion make their dreams come true. So we're super excited at the end of this to hear from you and what are your dreams and your goals and how can we help you make those dreams come true? So I'm hoping to share some experiences that I've had over the years. It's been about 28 years of grant writing to hopefully help build up some confidence for you to take some of these initiatives on your own. And again, to give you some tools to maybe help you out. These are just my experiences. There are probably some people in this call, some of our staff members as well, who have equally valuable experiences, but we'll just share what's worked for me over the years. So Olivia, if you can go forward. Great. So interspersed throughout this presentation are a number of pictures, and every picture represents sometimes multiple grants. This is Hannah from ADK Action, and she's wearing Compost for Good t-shirt representing. Thank you, Hannah. The bins behind her are, this is actually my business, and those bins are part of a grant. The compost that we made happened as a result of 3 grants. She's bringing stuff from a community garden that was a result of a grant. So again, it can be this kind of tedious process, and there's a lot of nitty-gritty details, but at the end of going through this entire process, there's some really exciting outcomes. So we'll bring those pictures in throughout this presentation as we go forward. So next slide. Great. So my slide is just running off a little bit, but I think I can see it all. So this is a Grant Writing 101. So we're going to present a number of vocabulary words that you maybe have heard or you're familiar with, but we're going to contextualize them into the grant realm so that the next time you go to apply for a grant, hopefully some of these terms will be familiar with you and you'll remember what they said. So the first thing is in this bucket of budget. So here we're going to start throwing some terms at you. So there's most grants have what are considered some sort of an in-kind or a match, and they will tell you right up front in something called a guidance document. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes too, but the in-kind or match, they'll say, so for example, one grant I'm writing is 75%, 25%. So 75% funding, 25% either in-kind or match. And people freak out, you know, if you're writing a $100,000 grant, you're like, how can I come up with $25,000? In-kind is something that you can account for through your time. It can be like a service that you bring that's of value. And there's lots of creative ways to do that. With consulting fees, you can make a higher consulting fee and say that a portion of your consulting fee is going towards the in-kind and the rest goes to being paid for the grant, et cetera. So I just want to differentiate those things. Match tends to be that you need cash value. My experience, most of the grants I've ever written have just been in kind. You do have to account for that, but it's a thing. Indirect costs, vocabulary word, is where many grants, not all, but many grants will actually give you a percentage of the total project to administer the grant. We're going to talk about grant administration later, but can be a really, really, really valuable thing. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So indirect, they might say, okay, we're automatically going to calculate 5%. And others will just allow you to include a line. Fringe, there's another word called encumbered. So this is another calculation that allows you to incorporate your operating costs into your budget, understanding that, okay, maybe I get paid $25 an hour, but that doesn't account for my office and it doesn't account for my health insurance and my communications person. So developing a budget for a grant, sometimes it's just the numbers and you're done, but sometimes it's a pretty complicated thing. Most really good grants will walk you through all of these really specific things. Most grants will ask you to write out a budget table with your numbers. You know, here's my line, here's what I'm going to do. Many of them give you templates. We love it when they do that, especially the ones that do the automatic summaries. And then they'll ask you to do a budget narrative, which says, this is the thing that we said we were going to do, and this is why. And they ask you usually to associate it with tasks. So again, all of this is like an overview that we're going to come back to as we work through this. The next part of a grant, when you complete a grant, again, these are just vocabulary words, they're the narrative. So this is the part where you write up what it is that you're going to be doing. So usually every grant guidance document will outline they'll give you headings. Again, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, what those headings might be and how to associate them. Here are some examples of terms that they might ask you to do. I'm just working with a farmer right now in Lewis County, and we're working on this concept of there's an objective, and then there's a task, and then there's measurement. And the way those three ways of thinking about it is, the objective is what's the outcome? That's another way to put it. What's your grant trying to accomplish? The output would be your task. That's what are you going to do? I'm going to conduct an education outreach campaign. I'm going to create a video. The measurement or the output is how are you going to measure what it is that you said that you're going to do? So those are the three levels generally that are embedded into a narrative. Plus, usually there's an opportunity to just say, this is what I'm doing. Other vocabulary words. Most grants will ask you to provide some evidence that other people care about your project. So a letter of commitment, this gets confusing for some people. A letter of commitment is a letter that you get from anybody in your grant who's written in that's going to be getting money. That would be a letter of commitment. A letter of support is a bunch of people who say, yay, rah, rah, ANCA's amazing. They did this for us. They did that for us. That's a letter of support. So that's another thing you might be asked to include in a grant. Sometimes they ask for references, similar to a letter of support. More research-oriented grants ask for citations, and partner lists are often requested. I will say about the letters of commitment and the letters of support that it is a common practice to provide a template to those that you're asking to provide. We will provide a very specific template. Usually there's a place for them to say their part, we say our part, and then we highlight in yellow where we need them to edit and update. So the chat is showing up over my my words, so I just have to keep closing it. Organizational, these are some terms. This is more EIN, Sam Duns. These are all acronyms, and EIN is a number that's affiliated. It's kind of like a social security number. This is some information that you'll need before you submit your grant. Public-private partnerships we'll talk about in more specific detail when we get there. Olivia, I don't know if there's any way you can scroll the whole thing up just a little bit, because the last part of my slides are getting covered by the bottom of the bar. And the last part is a guidance document I just mentioned. That's every time you go into a grant situation, you're gonna get something that tells you exactly what the grant is about. And keeping in mind too that if there's an RFI, which could be a request for information, that's not a grant. I've gotten sucked into that before. A request for information is an opportunity by a funder to go out and get some stakeholder engagement. What is it that you would want to see in a grant? If you ever are approached to do an RFI, I strongly encourage you to do it, because that's your way of engaging with the funders. RFP is a request for proposals. So that's where they're actually asking for the feedback. Next slide. Cool. So those are vocabulary words. So that was just jumping right into the weeds. Those terms are going to come back at you as we're going to kind of step back and get right from the very beginning. Usually a grant starts with a point, again, back to what I was talking about in the beginning. Somebody has a passion or something of interest to them. So, and you think, okay, I just need some money. How am I going to get this thing done? The very first question I would ask, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, some of you might decide, I don't want to write grants. I don't want to go for a grant, because it's not free money. It seems like free money, but it really isn't. There's a lot of hoops to jump through, and not just in the applying for a grant, but there's a whole world of grant administration. I actually worked with, I'm not going to name names, but I worked with an entity, and they walked away from $1.25 million to fund something that they had $9,000 cost share on, and they walked away because they did not want to administer the grant. So it's really important before you get into it to really think through, do you have the back end capacity to follow through on this grant? Because the last thing you want to do, and I've done this before too, the last thing you want to do is walk away from a grant that's been awarded. They don't want you to do it. You don't want to do it. That's not an ideal situation. So these are some of the questions that you should be asking. A lot of us in the not-for-profit world find that we have this mission and a vision. This is what we do. This is why we exist. But here's this grant funding, and we're going to go chase it. And all of a sudden, our mission, before we realize, we're like over here, and we're like building gadgets and gizmos, and we really meant to be like feeding hungry people, and saving puppies. So you want to. It's really important to, even though that option for funding is tantalizing, it's important to ask if it aligns with your mission and your vision. The second question is, do we have the capacity to do this thing and this doing? Again, this entity decided to walk away from that grant, the $1.25 million, because they did not feel they had the capacity to administer the grant, and I applauded them. Other people didn't, but I did. Ideas versus implementation, kind of the same idea. It's one thing to have an idea. Like every time I write a grant, I'm bonkers excited. I'm up on caffeine, and I hit submit. We get the notice, we got the grant, and then it's like, oh crap, because now you got to do the doings. So that's a really important question to really ask yourself too. Who will administer the grant? And by administering the grant, that means who's the entity that's writing the checks, doing the reporting. I'm working with a municipality right now who we're hoping will oversee one grant that they don't really get much benefit from it, to be honest, but they would be doing all of the grant management side of things. They don't know if they want to do that. So finding an entity, and whether they're doing it for free or you've written them into the grant to do the grant administration, is a really important question. Something that's really important to note, and you only find this out by hearing it from somebody or actually writing grants, is that timeframes are incredibly drawn out. So there's a release for proposals can happen in November, and then the deadline is in January, and then you submit in January, and then you find out in March, and then you get your contract in June, and then you negotiate your contract and you sign it can be a year. And in some cases, it's for me been a year and a half to 2 years from the point that you hit submit to your grant to when you're actually awarded. So that's a really important thing to understand. Understanding their timeframes too. They'll tell you, the grant funders will tell you how long it takes. Also, this one should be highlighted and bolded. most grants, many grants require you to front the money. And sometimes it can be a very long time until you get that money back. Finding out how long it takes, how long can you invoice, how frequently can you invoice? Is it every month? Is it every quarter? Is it at the end of the project? Do they keep a retainage? Some projects will retain 10% until the project is done. Some will retain 20% until the project is done. You're holding that money until you get reimbursed. So that's a really important thing to point out. Some banks and some business organizations will provide gap funding in those situations, and they're aware of it, but it's just something for you to keep in mind. Long-term institutional capacity is kind of related to above, idea versus implementation, but who's the person doing the doing? Who's the person? Do you have high turnover? Is it that there's going to be one person? We've gifted a few drum composters in the past. We're requiring the entities to provide proof that this person who's overseeing the drum composter is going to be there for a year or two. I mean, you can't promise anything, but it's really important to have that consistency so that you're not having to constantly update somebody on different grants. Do you have an in-kind or matching donors? We talked about that in our vocabulary section, but that's a really important thing to don't just hope. Sometimes I have done that and it works out, but sometimes you need to provide proof, and you will have to document this by way of invoicing. By this, I mean like in-kind, for example, as you accomplish the project. So the last point to ask, and I'm not saying these are the only questions, there's other questions I'm sure, is that after you've read the guidance document, which every funder will provide some sort of guidance that explains what it is that they're looking for, be sure that you can meet the legal and regulatory implications of the grant. We had one grant awarded for somebody, and it turns out that their insurance requirements didn't match what the grant needed, and they had to say no thank you. It was kind of unfortunate. Permitting is another thing too, depending on whatever it is that you're getting funded for. So do I really want a grant? That's a great first question to ask. Next slide, please. So again, these pictures are interspersed out. These are real projects in the North Country. This is a drum composter that went to the Wild Center. The drum composter was built through a grant, and then that grant granted the drum composter itself. So if anybody has seen the Tupper Lake Wild Center drum composter, it was a bunch of grants. Next slide. So one of the biggest questions is how do I find grants? And I will be honest with you, that is one of my least favorite things. I don't like looking for anything because I'm probably kind of lazy. But what happens is as you find yourself into anything that you love to do, you're going to find that things just start coming to you. You'll be signed up for a newsletter, and it'll be in the newsletter, and you'll start to know where to look for these things. However, there are definitely some grants websites and sources that you can sign up for. Services, I didn't list any of them here because it's a pretty broad range and they can be very specific and targeted. So those are definitely options. Getting relationships with the Adirondack Foundation is really helpful. They're one centralized organization that manages multiple streams of funding. But one of the most helpful things, again, as you find your niche, as you go, clean energy, food systems, whatever, entrepreneurial, you can sign up for certain, like on the federal level, you can sign up for listservs and you'll just start getting emails. I get emails from NYSERDA several a week. This funding stream is open, that funding stream is open. So the more you get into this and you sign up for things, more things start to come your way. At a private level, cultivating relationships. This part I'm going to say also should be highlighted and bolded. Lauren and I attended a grant writing workshop, and one of the most impactful things that I heard, because I came into grant writing feeling like, oh, feed me, I'm poor. And we really realized that you're entering into a mutually beneficial relationship. People are giving money, organizations are giving money because they want to or they have to. And so they can't give money away and meet their mission if there isn't somebody deserving to receive that money. So that just changed the way I thought about all of it. And the way that it changed my thinking is that you're entering into a relationship with the funder, if it's a government or a foundation or a local whatever. So that's a really important thing. And the soonest you can establish that relationship, the better for you in the future. That gets the second most important impactful thing that I was made aware of is the importance of finding a way to elevate yourself in the eyes of a funder and a reviewer. They are getting hammered, probably most cases, with applications, and they are looking for reasons to slough off the end. And you want to make sure that your name, your proposal is in that top part of that pile. And if this is a person that you've been like, you emailed 3 months before the solicitation to open up, and you're like, hey, hi, you know, I have this idea, what do you think? And, you know, you shouldn't be a pest, but certainly reaching out and letting them know that you exist is really important. We have a serial funder, sounds kind of scary, not like a serial killer, but a serial funder. And we are in there, we're on their radar. They know the work that we do, they know the good work that we do. And so we have this really solid relationship with them. So again, that building of relationships, can't say that one strong enough. Networking, kind of the similar type of a thing. Just, you can ask others how they're funded. Some folks might not want to tell you that, because then you'll be like probably in the same grant pool with them. But I can tell you from my own point of view, I want all projects to happen. So I'm always happy to share, or you can even just find out yourself. You can do some research on your own. How are others funded? If you see somebody who's got a similar mission to you, how are they funded? And then the last little orange part is, this is a strategy I've used where some funding sources, when I looked at them, I thought, but then I was like, I'm going to make it fit. And I made it fit in a way, you know, it wasn't like way out in left field, but it definitely, what it did is it would make my project a niche. It would be like, oh, well, this is different. We never really thought about that. That kind of backfires sometimes, but it also sometimes works, because you're not, again, you're elevating yourself. You're not like the same old that everybody's been seeing for months. So next slide, please. Okay, now we're gonna kind of go back into vocabulary land a little bit. So these are types of grants that are out there that you're gonna hear. Partner or fiscal sponsor grants. We actually just heard from somebody who wanted to become a fiscal sponsor, so we're guiding her through this process. So a fiscal sponsor is, I'm going to give you the example of Compost for Good. This is a group of 3 of us. We're not anything. We just love composting. We love Community Scout composting, but we did not want to become a not-for-profit. So we decided to align ourselves with a not-for-profit who was willing to be our fiscal sponsor. And what that means is that they have the organizational structure to apply for grants because they're a 501c3, or in other cases, it would maybe need to be a municipality. So in that fiscal sponsorship relationship, you form a tight relationship with an entity, and they act as your grant administrator. You do all the work, but they're doing like the paperwork and giving you the organizational structure. So that's one potential. It's not necessarily a kind of a grant, but it's a relationship for a grant. This also, you could be in a partnership with somebody. I'm applying to 3 different grants right now in partnership. Mini grants, I love mini grants. Mini grants are just that, they're mini and they're bite-sized, and you can usually whip them out in a few hours. So they're fun because you're not spending a week and a month drilling down. Usually you don't have to provide that much documentation. They are mini, but sometimes I just submitted a $5,000 mini grant. I could do a lot with $5,000. So, and it took me an hour and a half to complete. So those frequently come up multiple times a year. Foundation grants tend to be from a foundation. So this is maybe a business or a family who has created a setup, a funding stream. We can talk about lots of reasons why that foundation exists, but usually there's a mission that they want to accomplish, and they give out money in support of that foundation. Technical support, they're going back to this idea of a guidance document where every funder will give you something that says, this is what we want. These are outcomes. This is what we want to have funded. So paying attention to what they say in that guidance document, there would be an eligibility criteria, which very specifically, and I cannot say strongly enough how important that is. This is exactly what we will fund, and this is exactly what we won't fund. The last thing you want to do is write a grant and be like, oh, they don't do capital projects, crap. But one type of grant that you might see would be technical support. So the grant would be, we're not really going to give you money, but we're going to give you technical assistance. There's a lot of nice NYSERDA grants that are out there. There could be a grant. We got one through the Clinton County Health Department for my business. They gave us stuff, and it was a game changer. They gave us bins and thermometers and scales. It was their grant, but their grant allowed them to give away stuff. We've given away drum composters through our grants. Governmental could be something, this again would be a grant that is just for governments. An education grant is sometimes they're right in the heading, like the SARE education grant. That is what it sounds like. They're giving you funding to educate. Research, doing a research grant, it tends to be a little bit different because you're usually required to do additional research in the grant and have citations, and it's usually quite a bit of a rigorous grant. And then there's standards about how you deal with human subjects, et cetera, et cetera. Rebate is, there's an EPA bus rebate that just happened. This is what it sounds like. It's a rebate. So you spend the money, they give you some or all of the money that you spent back. These are all things to be aware of before you even start to do your proposal. Another type of a grant is that there could be a very specific deadline where they say November 23rd, 5 p.m. You can't, if you hit submit at 5:01, forget it, don't even try. But the other way is to do a rolling application. And what that means is, so there was like this DEC municipal grant. It said funds are available until May of 2023 or until they're exhausted. So you can submit your application anytime during that period. Sadly, those funds got spent pretty quickly, but that's rolling deadlines. I encourage you to not consider it to just be a rolling deadline, and pick a deadline for yourself, because you could get boxed out of money if it's a limited amount. Another two types of grants to be aware of, usually the really competitive grants and the ones that care about you. Sometimes will allow you to do a letter of interest or letter of intent or a pre-proposal. This is awesome because it gives you the chance, there's buy-in, it's not simple usually, but it gives you the chance to say, here's my idea, here's an outline of my grant, what do you think? And that is kind of like, if you're way off base, you don't go through the entire proposal process. I just recently went through a pre-proposal, got funded, got to the proposal stage, and they said, sorry, this isn't a good fit. So it doesn't mean you're an in, but it's a nice way to kind of slough off from the top. And public-private partnerships we've talked about in the past. Next slide. Great, so we've gone through, we talked about the guidance document, the going through, really doing your homework, asking your question, do we have the organizational capacity to do this? So then it's taking another step down into the eligibility criteria. So some of this is review. So we talked about eligible and ineligible costs. Some grants say, no way, we don't do capital. Other grants say, we only do capital. Some say, don't even bother asking us for staff time. Others say, we're only going to fund staff time. So most grants will say eligibility criteria or samples or whatever in bold, and boom, 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 boom. If you have any questions about any of it anytime, most grants will give you a person to contact. I will find an excuse, as long as I don't look like a total dope, I will find an excuse to reach out to the funders, again, just to keep my name and our organization, my business, whatever, and they're on their radar. So do the goals align? They're going to say goals. We are trying to accomplish this. Boom, 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 boom. Greenhouse gas emissions, increased acres of pasture land, more businesses. The funder will tell you what their goals are. You need to align your goals of your proposal as clearly and directly with their goals as possible. That just makes it easy for them. Math matters. This, when calculating an in-kind, this is a math moment. I finally figured out how to do it with algebra, but keep in mind that the in-kind, if you're saying I'm doing $100,000 project and the in-kind is 25%, it's not $25,000. You have to add the total amount of the project, which includes everything, and then it's 25% of that. I think I don't know, there's like algebra, but just to keep in mind that when calculating an in-kind, it's the percentage of the entire project, which includes the in-kind. So if anybody ever has questions about that, feel free to ask somebody else, but I could try to explain it. Most grant guidance documents will have an award cap and an award minimum. Oddly, sometimes the minimum is hard to do. It means it's just too much. In the North Country, sometimes it's hard to get $1 million project. We did at one point, and I'll never do it again, except for I am sort of doing it again. We said that we would ask to bundle 8 different projects together to reach that floor. And we did it. It took us 7 years to get the grant done, but we did it, and it got some really cool projects done. And then those award caps. Sometimes I always max out the cap. That might not be the smartest thing to do. Sometimes you have a better chance if you don't max the cap. And sometimes you'll get more points by not maxing out the cap. If it's a really competitive grant, you might come in under it because that way there's a better chance of you getting funded. That's kind of a hedge your bet kind of a situation. All grants will give you a timeline and a deadline. The deadline, I have a rule, and I've been up until 4 o'clock in the morning to avoid this. I will never, ever, ever, ever submit a grant on the day it's due, unless I have to. I've done a 4:59 in 55 seconds. My computer glitches with a $3 million grant before, and I will never do that again. So mind those deadlines. They come way faster than you expect. Paying attention to the total number of grants awarded. We just heard from a member of our staff this morning, was awarded a grant with 1,000 applicants, 140 some awarded, and he was one of them. I applied for one with 1 award. We didn't get it. So paying attention to the number of grants awarded, that kind of gives you a chance to decide, if this is a long shot for you, maybe you don't want to go for it. How competitive is the grant? Kind of the same thing. And ask questions even if you don't have to. This is what I said before. Get on their radar. If it's not a really ridiculous question, ask it. And, don't be a pest and always, hey, thanks, this is great, we appreciate it, but I was just wondering, what do you think? Most grant funders have been incredibly kind and very responsive. They want to see you succeed. Next slide. Cool. Olivia, we're still no go on the poll. I'm assuming you would chime in if it was something you wanted to interrupt on.
No, unfortunately, Jen, but thank you for checking.
Okay, cool. Looks like some cool stuff going on in the chat. So that's awesome. And I apologize. I'm not a great listener, and it's a lot of yakking, but sometimes it's just part of the process to share information. So I appreciate folks listening and taking some of the stuff in, and we look forward to hearing from you. So getting ready for the grant, you've decided, okay, this is me, this fits, this works. There's a lot of steps that you can learn. I am not an organized person, but writing grants has forced me to become organized, and now I'm kind of obsessed with it. I have spreadsheets and checklists and like categories, and there's timelines and things are color coded, and getting organized from the very beginning is really, really important. Set timelines for yourself. Letters of support go out on this date. Responses come back on this date. we're going to meet on a weekly basis if I have a team. So usually when you get a guidance document, they're going to have, these are projects that have been funded in the past. Check those out. Except for I never do. I don't want to get tainted. I think it's probably not a great idea, but I don't read them because I just want to have my own idea. But that's probably not best practices. It's probably helpful to read what other projects have they funded. Maybe I've got an idea. Maybe I'm really not a good fit. So previous awards. Stakeholder engagement is something I go through every single time I write a grant. I might have this great idea, except for when it's my own business, and I just consult with my partner. But finding out from, you might think, okay, this is the best idea ever, and it turns out nobody wants your idea. Like it doesn't meet the needs of anybody but yourself. So finding out, and a lot of grants will actually ask you to demonstrate. How do you know that what it is you're saying you're going to do actually meets the real needs? What have you done? Have you done surveys? What is this in response to? Reading the guidance document, we're going to say that one over and over and over. The whole RFs we've talked about in our vocabulary section. Most at least on a organizational level, like states, and if it's a really like the EPA and New York State, will have webinars. I strongly encourage you to be there. Same thing when you're at the webinar. If there's a Q&A, ask a question. Get yourself in the chat. Hey, hi, here I am, and that gets you on their radar. So really listening to those webinars is helpful. Paying attention. And again, now we're hopefully getting into some redundancies here, which is hopefully reinforcing some of the bigger points. Contact the funder as soon as possible. Get on their radar. Internal practices, I talked about having a checklist is really, really helpful. Even just creating it is helpful. And you'll have every time this is done, okay, my letters of commitment are done, blah, blah, blah. If you're in a team writing a grant, that can be incredibly rewarding, but very challenging too. So you want to coordinate with your team from the beginning. I'll have a kickoff meeting right from the start where we all decide what's the workflow. Lauren's going to do this, Danny's going to do that, Adam's going to do that. And we set up a standing meeting time. So it's sometimes every week, every other week. and then we all move together. We happen to just use Google Drive as a shared resource to be saving things. So we've got those milestones, and this is going to be done by then. And it's really important to stick with those milestones as you go. Identifying key partners from the very beginning. We are working with a Vermont organization we're meeting with this afternoon because we think that they're the bomb. They're amazing. And so we've seen their history, their past. So we are really excited to be working with them. This is a detail, but one thing that is many grants require you to smush multiple PDFs into one. And there's somebody help me out. Is it Acrobat? What's the Adobe? What's the one that allows you to do that? There's Lauren. Were you gonna? No, Olivia.
Jen, I think you said it was Adobe Acrobat Pro.
Okay. Pro. Correctly. That's the one. Yep. So that allows you to mush PDFs together. I see all these things I'm saying to her because I've made the mistake in the past. So having somebody who has Pro that has the ability to combine PDFs is really helpful. Next slide, please. Another picture of a grant. This is Herman DeKalb. I think we got them a drum composter, and their entire school started composting all the way from their preschoolers straight through until high school. And that's what happens in the kitchen. She's happy and she's peeling onions. So, yay grants. Next slide. Okay, so we're ready. We're doing the grant. We're doing the writings. You're going to see, saying this over and over and over, partner with your funder in advance. They are your partner. You're not going to them for a handout. They're your partner. Asking for letters of support and commitment way in advance is really important. They take time to come back. People are busy. You're asking them to do something sometimes for free. So giving them that template, giving them multiple weeks to respond to them, but giving them a deadline is also important. Please have it done by blah, blah, blah. You will most likely have to pester most of them, many of them, that's fine, but give them time to do it. Making it as easy as possible for the grant reviewer is really, really important. I'm going to have some examples of that in a minute, but understanding that they are possibly going through, you're in college, you're a college professor and you're grading 500 term papers. How can you make it as easy as possible for them? This I want to say too is, hopefully now this is redundant too, is you don't want to look needy. You don't want to look destitute. That was something I had in my mind about grants when I would write a grant and be like, we're so poor. We need. They don't want to hear that. They definitely want to know what your needs are, but they want to know you're an investment for us. So if we give you money, support, whatever, we want to know and be reassured that you're going to take that and you're going to turn it into something beautiful. You don't have this history of failure. You have a history of success. But if you just have this tiny little thing of help, everything's going to be amazing and the clouds are going to part and the sun's going to shine on you. So you don't want to go to a funder looking destitute, needy, whiny. You want to make your bright spots shine so that they think that this is really worth our investment. You guys are amazing. Even if you are destitute and needy and whiny, just don't let them see it. One of the most common things I've heard from grant reviewers that drives them insane are grant proposals that ramble. And this goes back to the guidance document, and we're going to talk about this in some of the illustrations shortly. Be very, very succinct, be very clear. And most grants, thankfully, will give you either a word or a character count. And that really helps you stay focused and not do too much rambling. Next slide. So here's an example. Again, this is just what I've chosen. There are incredibly successful grant writers out there that have their own ways of going about things. But this was my attempt to make things pop. So I chose to add pictures because I figured that, again, it would put kind of a three-dimensional perspective to my proposal. This is what we're about. We're trying to turn this food scraps. And what I did is I evolved each page, started with food scraps, and it evolved all the way through to it being compost, to it being back to a seedling with each page with a different picture. So I told two different stories, one through pictures and one through narrative. I use color. These when it says section A, executive summary abstract, that is their language. That's from the guidance document, verbatim. So that says to them, I'm paying attention. I'm going to make this easy for you. That's the heading. It's in green. It pops. Then 1 is and 2 in bold. That's their language. I had to customize it a little bit to make the word counts fit, and to make it applicable to an actual proposal, but that's their language, and it says to them, I know this is what you want. The submitting organization name, boom, ANCA. They don't have to wonder, they have to look for it. There it is. I also, as you go down, project history is in italics. Those, I think that those are my headings, but I used that as a way, same thing. This is who we are. This is what we're about. This is drawing your attention. Everything underneath that section is going to talk about the project history. Next slide. Most helpful grants will give you a budget template. So there's an example of one template from one of our potential funders. And if they're really kind, they give very specific instructions above and below, you know, wherever. I will use the guidance document 99% of the time, even if it's an online submission, especially if it's an online submission. And I will create my own, it's called a working document. And I always label it hot copy, which means nobody touches it but me, or like one or two very trusted people. So you will typically get a grant, in a grant, you'll have a budget table, and then you will populate the budget table based on what they're asking. So the line item, these are typically recommended. Sometimes they're not recommended, they're required. But sometimes they'll allow you to add your own line items in there. Task 1, task 2, task 3, task 4. We're going to talk about that in a couple of slides, but those are the what are you doings. Those are the outputs, not the outcome is like, we're going to save the world. The output is the thing that you're going to do. And many budget tables will require you to align a specific task to what it is that how much money you're going to charge for that task. This does not need to be written in stone, but you need to come as close as you possibly can. And then there's an alignment to the right. Line items, usually proposed match. Be sure that they mean match in kind, that, you know, it isn't dollars, it's in kind, you know, whatever. Sometimes they use them interchangeably, but it's your job to figure out exactly what it is that they're looking for. Next slide. And also just as a reminder that many budget tables, most will require then a narrative and being very specific. Okay. So here's an example of a task table. One of our grants required us to do. I have a task, develop and update educational materials. Again, this is not my objective. This is what I'm going to do. And then each task will have subtasks, and those are frequently called deliverables. That's a vocabulary word. I use that word all the time now. It's hard to imagine. I never knew what it meant. So, and then there's individual subtasks that all affiliated with that one task. Usually there's maybe 3 to 4 to 5 tasks. Usually task 5 is reporting that they mandate that you do. So this is a task table. This is out of my application. I tried to be as clear as possible. These are their headlines, and typically they will ask you to provide a timeline. Next slide, please. So some more examples. I use red in this one to call out the high level titles. I then subsectioned it. So 1.0, that was the entire section. And then I subtitled it 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and those all again align directly with the guidance document. I will also use call out boxes that you saw in the other one. I've used pictures. This one, sometimes I will, if a certain section says, how does your project meet our goals? Sometimes I will insert a call out box right at the very beginning. That's just my way of saying, boom, I'm going to shove this in your face. We are meeting your goals, and here's how. And it puts a box around it and calls things out. Next slide. Look at all of those arrows. And I'm sorry for the sirens in the background. We never have sirens in Saranac Lake, but we got it right now. So it's really important to again, keeping yourself on their radar, brand yourself, put your logo in there right in the very beginning. Sometimes I put it right into my header or my footer, so it carries through to every single page. The headings are popped, they're in bold. This particular grant has very tight word counts. So I was like, we want money. You know, I was trying to be super concise. Goal alignment at the bottom, you can see I pulled out, these are their goals because they very specifically wanted, this section is to address our goals. So we are affiliated with that. And then we've got anytime something is, we really want to call to their attention, we also can add italics. And next slide, please. Okay, so those are just some general ideas on writing the grant. Submission, I was in a band in Potsdam, and the conductor, his mantra was, it's later than you think. And I can't say that enough. It's later than you think. Those deadlines sneak up on you, and the last thing you want to do is to have invested hours and hours and hours of your and your partner's life into this grant, and it's the night before and you just can't get it done, or you got to be up until 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning doing it. So preparing to submit, having, we've got some amazing reviewers on ANCA staff that frequently I'll write the scope and I pass it off to somebody else that knows nothing about what I'm doing, and I give it to them well before it's due. Spell check is great. It's really important. If you're submitting something that's poorly edited and full of errors, that might be their excuse. Like, nope, sorry, they don't have the time to do a thorough edit. We're not going to even review this. So having a third-party editor, having that editor too, making sure that you align each heading. This is what they're asking. Did what you write align with what they're asking? So having that reviewer do that level of support is incredibly helpful as well. Knowing, hopefully at this point, you know how to submit. That's one of the first things you should know. Many more and more have online submission portals. Hopefully they auto save, but sometimes they don't. So if there's any way, and some of them will give you a template to download to work from, again, that becomes your working document. I strongly recommend that you have that document. You're editing in this document. You can then, okay, I'm done, cut and paste, put it into the online portal. If it is a save at the end of the page and you have to manually hit save, I'm hitting save like every 40 seconds. Sometimes, most are online at this point in time, but sometimes they ask you to mail a hard copy. Understand that there's mailing times in between all of that. I don't know if anybody does that anymore. Email attachments, that's also very typical. They be very mindful. They'll tell you what to put in the subject line. That's really important. I will always ask, if I don't get a confirmation email, did you get it? And sometimes even when it's online and I get an automatic approval acceptance, I'll actually email still and say, did you get it? Just to be really, really super clear. Where to submit, there's lots of different places where to submit, but just pointing out that there are some pretty clunky, but also sometimes not so terrible federal and state level platforms, Grants Gateway, grants.gov, SAM. These are all very, they're government websites. Once you go through it, it's not that terrible, but we are actually in a situation right now where we're having to get some approvals through a federal grant portal, and it's holding the whole entire grant up to the point where the grant might not happen. So if you are at the point of wanting to do a federal or a state level grant, I strongly recommend you can get in touch with us. We can help walk you through it, or there are webinars, trainings, there's tech support as well out there to get through those. But we could do a whole presentation on those federal and state grant submissions. But they can also be pretty manageable too. Next slide, please. Another picture. This is a drum composter. Yay. Next slide. Oh. It's a pudgy button. So I'm just gonna, like, a year ago, I had probably a 99% success rate. I gotta say that. And I said it out loud. Since then, I have had my fair share of denials in the past year and a half. It can be crushing, but it's, as with life is my philosophy, the denials aren't the end of the story. I've gotten denied and then gone back and reapplied the next year. And now I'm getting serial funded from a funder because we took the denial as a learning opportunity. Many organizations, funders will give you very specific feedback. Most will give you an audience. If you say, I would like to meet with you to please go over this, and they'll go through everything and explain to you why it is that you were not reviewed, that you were not approved. Going through, if you had a team that submitted, bringing your team into that review process, write some notes down. What can I do differently? And again, if this was a fit for you and you felt like, you know, dang it, this was a great proposal and it should have been funded, submit it again. And I get into the habit of thinking, oh, I'll just tweak the old proposal, and it usually doesn't work that way. You usually get into your old proposal and you're like, oh God, wow, I was horrible. But try again. It doesn't mean it's the end of the story. Maybe it does. Maybe it just wasn't meant to be a fit for you. I'm on two rounds of one entity that they're going to fund us. They don't know it yet, but they're going to fund us. So they've denied us twice, but we're not giving up. Next slide, please. So you got funded. That's awesome. Sadly, that is just the beginning. Not sadly, it's actually exciting because you're doing the stuff. But as we talked about in the very beginning, now comes the work and getting. So you find out you've been funded. Again, the process from there is they're going to kick you back your scope of work, and they might have some comments. They might say, you need to clarify this, you need to add this, you need to change that. So this is the contract phase. So the funder will then say to you, here's your scope of work, but we want you to change this or change nothing or whatever. You give it back to them. They say this works. There's W-9s that go back and forth, all kinds of, basically this is the phase that you enter into a legal relationship with them so that they can pay you. And so at that point, it could take, like I said, it could take a year because it usually involves lawyers. But at the end of it, you will have a contract 99% of the time that is technically a legally binding situation that explains very clearly, you're going to do this, they're going to do that. These are the timelines. I always host a kickoff. If it's just me, obviously I'm not having a party for one, but if it's a kickoff, if I have a grant with a team, we have a kickoff session where we all sit down and we say, all right, let's get at it. Who's going to do what? What are the timelines? What's our process? How are we going to get organized? These terms, grant administration, project management, contract management, the one differentiation, because this is important, grant and project kind of are lumped together. Contract management is managing of the contract, go figure. But that means that's the management of the relationship, the legal relationship, the financial relationship between the funder and whoever it is that's administering your grant. So there may be MOUs, memorandums of understanding. If there's subcontractors, you've got to work out that relationship. Keeping in mind, there's a few nuances to understand that just because you sign a contract and you get 2 months into it and you're like, oh crap, we got that wrong. You can usually go through a contract modification process. It can be easy or it can be horrible, or somewhere in between, but you're not bound to the contract necessarily. You just have to jump through hoops. Contract extensions frequently don't require anything. You just say, you have to prove that you've got a lot of progress, but hey, funder, this is why we need 2 extra months. And I have never been denied a contract extension as long as you prove that you've gotten some progress. Another factor is that you have created a budget and you've said, all right, personnel, staff time, blah, 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 that most contracts will allow you to move funds between lines as long as it doesn't go beyond 10% of the project. But if you want to go beyond 10% of the project, most times we just say, this is why, and they're like, cool, go for it. Retainage, we talked about in the beginning, be aware of this in the beginning. I have one grant that has a 10% retainage. I have another grant that has a 20% retainage. That's their way of making sure that you get the grant done. So they're going to hold those funds and then you're going to get one big payment at the end. Shifting back over to project and grant management, grant administration. I can't say this again strongly enough that it is not nothing to administer a grant. You're writing checks, you're processing invoices. Your invoice has to, if you have subcontractors, you're managing their invoices. You have to track how much of the grant is left, how much money was spent, and at what point. So it's not nothing. It's not, if you're a business manager, you're fine. You're gonna handle it fine. A really important part of the grant administration process too is, this is kind of lumped sort of with project management, is reporting. Every grant will require some sort of reporting. I have one that's one fat one at the end, but typically it's every quarter. And I like to wow people with my reports, my quarterly, with this Composter Good quarterly reports. I put pictures in there. It's long, it's chunky, and every single thing that we've done, because I want them to keep giving us more money in the future. So, and this is your chance to say, hey, look at us. We're rocking it. Thank you. We appreciate what you've done, and this is what we've done with it. And then the big M, metrics are part of usually a same thing every grant. You're going to know what those metrics are in the beginning because you told them what your metrics are going to be. So this might be greenhouse gas emissions saved, numbers of jobs created. Determining metrics sometimes can be very prescriptive. and you have to document, this is how I did it, and here's my formulas, and these are my resources. But just know going into the grant that you are likely going to be obligated to report back in tangible numbers what it is. And again, these go back to the outputs that we talked about. This is what you said that you're gonna accomplish in numbers. And speaking to project management, and then we can move on after this. Project management this is the doing of the grant. This isn't the funding and the contracts and stuff like this. This is the deliverables. And 2 days ago, I was standing in a field in a farm in muck boots, listening to farmers. That was our project. We were doing the doings. That requires, if you want to go to the next slide, Olivia. Just my system, I immediately upon award, I organize folders. Every folder is associated with a task. And if we can remember, the tasks are like one big bucket. And then if I open up any one of those task folders, there's 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Everything that goes with any of those tasks that are going to be part of this grant go into their corresponding folder. And I always pull out some sort of an overarching contract document in the mother folder that just is my quick reference. What did I say I was going to do? Next slide. So takeaways. Hopefully these are all reviews, and we're going to hopefully turn things around in a couple of minutes and hear from you all. Forming relationships with your funders. Hopefully that was pretty clear. It's later than you think to apply, so don't push those deadlines off. It's perfectly fine to submit early. Sometimes you could submit and you still have the chance to go back and edit up until the point that it's actually due. That's always helpful. Reading the guidance document again and again and again, have somebody else read it, highlight it, scribble, draw arrows. You know, this is important. Go the extra mile to make yourself stand out. Denials are part of your journey to success, and sometimes don't apply for a grant. Go get a loan. Don't do the thing. Sometimes grants aren't the right fit for you. Next slide.
And thanks so much to everyone for joining us and sharing your knowledge and your experience and asking your questions.